Back in 2010 in Tucson, Arizona, United States, something happened that would change everything. It began as a quiet, technical experiment inside an agency fighting a brutal cross-border drug war. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, under a broader initiative called Project Gunrunner, tried an audacious tactic: allow suspected straw purchasers to buy weapons in U.S. gun stores, follow them, and trace the guns to cartel leaders in Mexico. The tactic even had a name among agents: Gunwalking. On paper, it promised to reach the bosses who ordered the guns. In practice, it would become a catastrophe. In December 2010, Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was killed in a desert shootout near the border. When investigators traced two rifles found at the scene, they were linked back to sales that had been allowed by ATF agents in Phoenix as part of Operation Fast and Furious. That single connection detonated a scandal. Weapons that U.S. agents had knowingly permitted to flow into Mexico had turned up at a scene where an American officer lay dead. Whistleblowers inside ATF, most prominently Agent John Dodson, went public and testified to Congress that supervisors had authorized the tactic even after mounting evidence it wasn't working. Dodson described tactics that disregarded basic investigative controls: failing to buy back weapons, failing to coordinate with Mexican authorities, and failing to monitor the chain of custody. The result was not a neatly dismantled trafficking network, but a trail of unaccounted weapons surfacing at violent crime scenes on both sides of the border. Congress seized on the story. Oversight hearings in 2011 and 2012 played out as a political and institutional drama. Lawmakers demanded documents and accountability. The Department of Justice's Inspector General launched a sweeping review and, in 2012, issued a report that was damning but nuanced. ATF's strategy was poorly planned and managed, coordination with U.S. and Mexican partners was inadequate, and senior officials failed to appreciate or properly mitigate the risks. The report stopped short of finding a deliberate plot to harm, but it cataloged reckless decisions and systemic breakdowns. The political fallout grew. The House of Representatives unanimously demanded documents. Attorney General Eric Holder was the first sitting Attorney General in U.S. history to be held in contempt of Congress in December 2012, after the Justice Department declined to produce certain internal memos. For many Americans, that moment crystallized the worst fears of a government more interested in protecting itself than in telling the truth. Fast and Furious became shorthand for a broader, uglier suspicion that law enforcement and political officials could knowingly unleash violence, then hide mistakes beneath layers of bureaucracy. Critics argued the operation demonstrated moral blind spots in counter-drug strategy and a willingness to experiment with lives. Defenders pointed to the aim: dismantling cartel leadership, and to the complex realities of transnational crime. The Inspector General's report ultimately placed blame on leadership failures and poor judgment rather than an intentional cover-up to conceal malfeasance, but the damage to public trust was done. Beyond politics, the scandal had concrete effects. Relations with Mexican authorities were strained. Frontline agents, both American and Mexican, felt betrayed, and families like Brian Terry's demanded answers and accountability that felt incomplete. The episode forced reforms in gun tracking policy and renewed scrutiny over how federal agencies conduct covert investigations that carry real human costs. A decade later, Fast and Furious remains a cautionary tale. It shows how an investigatory gambit, conceived under pressure to strike at cartel hierarchies, metastasized into a crisis of confidence when oversight failed and consequences were not fully anticipated. The conspiracy whispers of cover-ups and political protection still circulate in public debate, but the historical record is clearer. A flawed strategy, poor management, and institutional defensiveness combined to produce a tragedy that altered the conversation about law enforcement, transparency, and accountability at the U.S.-Mexico border.